You're welcome.
Sharon, it's a delight to be on this forum and to have an opportunity to talk about the most important issue facing America and the state of Michigan, education.
Well, Governor, this evening we want to talk about strategies. We want to talk about policy. We'd like to get into discussion with you and later with our panelists about what is the status of education in the state of Michigan now, and also what are the strategies in place and the plan to move education forward. Before we get into strategies, let's begin with your assessment of public education in the state of Michigan right now.
Public education in the state of Michigan isn't good enough today. It's an $8 billion industry that needs to be improved. Our graduates aren't as talented as they need to be. They don't know enough. Too many people are dropping out and not graduating. We have to fix that. And so all in all, we've got a lot of work to do. That's not to say that there aren't some bright spots, some success stories in Michigan, but I think we rank about average in our state, and that isn't good enough. When we look at the American student compared to the foreign students that we're going to have to compete with in our global economy, we simply have to do a lot better. And the challenges are urgent. We need to start now. We need to do, as Lamar Alexander, the Secretary of Education, said, let's break the mold, and we've got to do that with some of our outmoded thinking. It has to be really changed. I'm looking forward to our panel. It's a provocative group that we've got with us today.
Yes. Where do we begin?
I think we begin with the schools themselves. If we look at education in Michigan, over 500 plus school districts, but more importantly, over 3,200 school buildings where learning takes place. And they are today a franchise almost, if you will, exclusive territories for these schools. I've suggested that we need to break out of this and to give parents and students more choices, more options. We saw an effort by the Detroit Board of Education and the leadership to do that with the all-male academies. I support that type of approach. I support allowing local people to create options, to do it differently. We've seen springing up across this state in Kalamazoo area, a science and math center, where all of the students in the intermediate district compete for the right to attend this school that focuses on the science and math development. I think that we've got to give administrations a great deal more flexibility, break down some of the rules and some of the barriers that have prevented things from being done. I think that the schools themselves have to be freed so that they can reward competence and excellence and replace incompetence and lack of achievement.
Governor, when you mentioned school of choice and giving parents and the community more power to choose the education, one problem with that I've read about and I understand is that when you're dealing with a community that has very few resources, you then have very few choices, so that your choice may still be limited. How do you address that when you're talking about a community with limited economic resources, with limited human resources? How then do you create something from little?
Well, I think that we start with parents, or in many cases, far too many cases, a single parent today, and they want what's best for their child, and they have a pretty good sense about is this school going to work or isn't it? What's going to be a better break for my child? And I think we have to help them, even give them more information about their schools. Michigan's a leader with our Public Act 25, the school improvement planning process. Every school in the state, every one of those 3,200 schools today has to have a plan, has to involve parents, the teachers, the staff at the schools, talk about their test scores and how to do it better. I think we have to change our testing, too. I think we have to measure outcomes. I'm less interested in telling someone how to get there, because I've had a lot of teachers say to me, you know, we can teach if we're freed up to do it. Give us the resources, give us the help, and let us do what we know how to do. And to that parent who doesn't have a lot of resources, even we saw it in Detroit, many parents who said, look, I may not have a lot of choices, but here's an all-male academy with discipline, with rigor in the curriculum, and we want our child to have that opportunity to go there.
But even with that, it's limited. I mean, just by you only can serve so many children, and there's an application process, and if you could just maybe walk us through, I think it would be helpful. I think when we look at a lot of strategies and
Sure.
the ideas, and we talk about terms like empowerment and community-directed, you get a sense that sounds good and that sounds powerful for a community. But if we could just walk us through, take a given school in a given community, where you have 80% of the population may be headed by one person, maybe where the income level is below middle income, where resources are few, where staff morale is low. How could that, given that school, let's say maybe the school population, the elementary school, let's say of maybe 350 or 450 students, where would they begin, step by step, to begin to really put in place, for instance, school improvement?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, and I think it starts right at that school. I think there's got to be a talented principal in that school. There has to be a leader. And I think that the administration has to be in a position to be able to put good principals in schools. I don't think that we can have a set of laws which allow someone to, merely because of the collective bargaining agreement, to stay in place as a principal at the school that we're talking about, even if they've shown they can't do the job. So you've got to have the ability to put leadership in there. You've got to have the ability to assemble a staff that isn't tired, that isn't low on its morale, and you've got to have that staff then working to develop the kind of curriculum. And I think that when we talk about empowerment, what's it mean? It really means the right to be able to make some of these decisions. And we've got a school building that may not open until that parent's gone off to work. We're going to let that child go home at 3 o'clock before the parent gets home. Maybe we're going to talk about expanding the length of the school day. We may talk about expanding the length of the school year. All of these things have to be factored in, and let's start creating some choices so the parent can say, well, I like that about this school. I want my child to go there. Someone else can say, no, I don't. I want a traditional program. I want 8 in the morning and home at 3. And
what are the constraints? What gets in the way of that happening, and what would get in the way?
I think old-fashioned thinking, outmoded thinking, the lack of courage to make changes, defense of the status quo, some of the same things that hurt us in other areas of society. We've done it this way for 100 years. Why change? Well, we change because we aren't doing it well enough today. And when we talk about the cycle of poverty, how do we break that? Clearly the schools have an important role to play. We've got to start earlier. One of the things that we've put in our education plan is working with every child much earlier, trying to work with those at-risk families so we can start with that child at the earliest possible age and integrate more carefully and fully our social services and human services into the school itself.
Could you talk a little bit more about that, about the early education? Because I understand Head Start has been in jeopardy, and funds for early education in preschool actually has been dwindling. So what's the early education
plan? That may be true nationally, but not in Michigan. Actually, we've got some additional $25 million in those programs this year. That's been one of the priority areas, and it's something we feel very strongly about. And I personally believe that that's one of the great things you can do. The President's outlined 6 national education goals. One of those is to have every child ready to learn when they start school. And that's an ambitious goal. The others are quickly a disciplined learning environment that's drug-free and violence-free. Another is measurable outcomes at the 4th, 8th, and the 12th grade. Another is that we be first in math and science in the world by the end of the 1990s. And finally, that we have an adult literacy program that we can go after our adult population. Well, all of that can be integrated in the schools. When I talk about bringing some of the human services programs to the schools, we're again recognizing that while we have an $8 billion education industry in Michigan, we spend $5.8 billion just in the Department of Social Services alone. That's an all-time record. And so what we want to do is maybe some of those services can be more effectively delivered where the young people spend most of their time, and that's school. And so we're looking at some innovative, break-the-mold kinds of programs that way. And summer school is another thing that it gets to be very important. Should we not have something going on, maybe even change the structure of the school year so we don't have that 3-month gap where what they learned in June maybe has been forgotten by September. And so all of this is possible. And we look at schools today, and with, as I said, an $8 billion investment, it's hard to argue that we're not spending enough, but are we getting enough? I don't think so.
Have there been school districts that have adopted some of the policies and some of the strategies that you've outlined, the early education, bringing more social services to the schools, involving staff in overhauling curriculum if you need to? Have there been some school districts where there have been some successes in the last?
I think there have been some successes. I'm not sure that I can point to any right here in our own backyard. There's a class here or a program there. I'll tell you that the environment in the school makes a big difference. We've seen in some of the private schools where that has made an enormous difference, just in terms of the attitude of the child toward the school and the feeling of security and safety and confidence that one has at school. So we can go around the country and find different examples. The fact is, though, that education is such a big business in our schools. And the City of Detroit public schools, I think the budget's over $1 billion. Well, that's a big industry. We can't run that from Lansing, but we need to give the board and the superintendent the kinds of autonomy and authority they need to be able to make some decisions. And we need to free them from our...
How do you do that? What are the state policies or the state initiatives that would then allow local districts that kind of autonomy?
I think we've taken probably too much power out of the hands of the administration and the school board and let it be lost through collective bargaining. I think that's one factor, particularly at the principal level. I think our Department of Education imposes too many rules and regulations on school districts, too much counting for this dollar and that dollar rather than simply focusing on the outcomes. The important question is, what's the child know at the end of the day, at the end of the year? And that ought to be our objective. I mean, the school year that we have today was set up for an agrarian society 100 years ago, and nobody goes home in May or June to do crops anymore.
But at the state level, then, how does the state assist the local district to make those kind of changes?
We go to the legislature and say, this is our agenda. This is what the people of Michigan want. This is what the people, in fact, need. Vote the changes. It's voting on specific bills in the legislature that...
You've mentioned collective bargaining several times, and so you see that there needs to be some kind of legislation then that changes the collective bargaining.
Well, I think, let's just take tenure, for example, which is a statutory right. We have one case where it took 15 years to remove a teacher to settle a case who was determined was not doing the job ultimately. Now
is that typical?
No, that's the most extreme example. But imagine that kind of an example, 15 years that before all the litigation was wrapped up. What about, is a principal a part of the management, or is that part of the union? You know, I think that that's a pretty important position to be determined by seniority. If I got the right seniority, I get the school. I don't like that, and I think that we ought to. Again, we've got to start our inquiry from what's in the best interest of the child. And too frequently we've said.
Excuse me, Governor, but it almost sounds like sometimes that you're almost advocating doing away with the union altogether in terms of the teacher union, because maybe it's just changing the collective bargaining process. But when I keep hearing collective bargaining is one of the major issues, one of the major constraints.
I don't want us to get distracted over there, because that's one of those politically sensitive things, because they frankly, the teachers unions have been very dominant in policy making, and they're an important part of the change. We simply can't replace, nor should we seek to, all of our teachers. We've got outstanding teachers out there. What I say in terms of empowering a school, one of the things that's very important in a school building is if the third grade teacher isn't good, that impacts the ability of the fourth grade teacher to do her job.
What incentives would you suggest then to build in so teachers would buy into this kind of a empowerment or kind of plan or the overhaul, where the teachers see that there's some benefit for the students, but that also that they're protected and they have some security also?
Well, I think that the focus on believing in the child is the priority of what we're doing. I mean, if that's not the priority, then we perhaps have a problem right out of the box. I mean, and that's...
So people are always concerned about job security, and they're always concerned about evaluation process and whether or not it's going to be a fair one, and whether or not they're going to be awarded, or whether or not they're going to be compensated for their jobs.
Sounds to me like that's the problem, doesn't it?
It's an issue. I'm sure it's an issue, and it's one that one of the issues that will continue to have to be discussed. And
well, I'd like to start from the interest of the child and then work toward a system that works. What's in the best interest of the child? How do we get the best possible teacher in front of that classroom? How do we give that teacher the help that he or she needs to do the job? How do we put the right kind of role models there? How do we help that family? It's all of that. Let's start from that basis. I think for too long we've started from what's the interest group want?
I think you're right, that we will have to start with what's best for the child, and when we come back, we're going to come back with a panelist, and we can start there. What is best for the child, and how do we get there, and how do we make sure that we look at the other interests also, because in order to meet the needs of the child, there are all the adults that are involved in the caregivers, as I call them, for the children, and the educators Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Looking forward to the panel.
Education, Our Common Struggle is brought to you by Stallworth and Lindenbeck.